All right, students. Section 3 of Chapter 14 deals with the Mexican-American War. And this is actually the conflict that gives us the manifest destiny. It is, um, some people say that President Polk manufactured this war. Others say not so much. And I'm going to, at some point in class, have a little activity where I'm going to ask you for your opinion. We're going to present the facts and see what you think. All right, again, sorry for the formatting. It just is what it is. The New Mexico Territory, what is called the New Mexico Territory, included more than just what is present-day New Mexico. It included a lot of what we consider southwestern states: New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. Not California, okay, and not Texas, but a lot of that area in between was considered New Mexico. And people had been living there for thousands of years, Native Americans, obviously, and then the Spanish conquistadors had arrived in the 1500s. And with the conquistadors came missionaries, and we're going to talk more about them in just a minute. And you know a little bit about them from Texas history, but we're going to talk about them more specifically. All right, so before independence from Spain, the Spanish attempted to keep Americans out of the New Mexico Territory. So they don't want us there, and you knew this from Texas history. Mexico was viewed by Spain much like the English colonies were viewed by England. It was a mercantilist system. The New Spain in the New World was there only to trade with Old Spain in the Old World. And so they didn't want the people in the area that's Mexico and Texas and California and all the rest of New Spain, they didn't want them trading with Americans. All right, but once Mexico gets its independence in 1821, now naturally that's like 300 years later, but once it gets its independence in 1821, the new Mexican government does encourage trade between especially the northern areas of its land up near Texas, New Mexico, California area. California not as much because they have ports, but those landlocked areas where it's hard to get goods, it makes much more sense for them to trade with Americans, especially once we have the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The United States is right there. And it's much easier for them to trade with the United States than it is to try to trade with people halfway around the globe when there's no ports. And so the new Mexican government does allow trade and even encourages trade between the United States. And this is how we get the Santa Fe Trail. Hold on, I'm going to pause this and see if I can't get this reformatted. Okay, maybe that's a little bit better. So you need to know William Becknell, and you need to know the Santa Fe Trail. He's the person who didn't discover it exactly, but he began using it. I'm sure it was old Native American pathways that he turned into a wagon trail that he could use as a trade route. And he decided that he would go to Santa Fe, the city, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and take stuff out there to trade with these people who were out in the middle of nowhere. It starts in Independence, Missouri, as almost all of those western trails do, and then goes through follows the Arkansas River, and then goes south. But he's only the first. He makes a ton of money on his first trip out there, and when he comes back and tells people how much money he made, and it's not that hard, and you can do it too, people start following him, and not just to trade. American citizens, U.S. citizens, began to follow him out there to stay too, to live as well. And here's a little map. All right, so let's talk about California. As you can see by this map, and I really like this map, it shows you how many missions there were in California. Now, California's missions were a little more successful than the Texas missions, but that bar is sort of low. The missions are used as schools and trade posts and places to worship, all of those things all together. And they were more successful in California. I think because California as a whole was more successful than Texas was as a Spanish province, as a Mexican province, and probably because of it being right there on the Pacific Ocean. It was a little bit more successful. And so they developed a string of missions, and you know the purpose of the mission system. There's a couple pictures of the insides of them. All right. So the purpose of the missions was to convert Native Americans to becoming Spanish people, cultural Spaniards. Um, it was not just to teach them about religion and to make them Roman Catholic, although that was very important. Remember, I told you a long time ago, like at the beginning of the school year, that one of the reasons of colonization for the Spanish people, and even the French, but more so the Spanish, is back in those days, it was viewed that if you could create more Christians, God would smile on you even better. I mean, you would be higher up in his approval rating. And so originally when the missions were built, you wanted to create more Christians, make these Native Americans into Christians. Not as soon as you showed them how wonderful Christianity was, they would be wanting to be Christians. But they found that if they could just teach them to read, then they would be able to read all about Christianity in the Bible, and they would want to be Christians. So they became more than just churches. They became schools, and then they became outposts for trade, and they became places where you could ranch cattle, and they became places where you would have to farm and you would make things. And so the Native Americans that began sort of buying into this whole system did begin to take on sort of a Spanish type culture. But again, it wasn't because they were browbeaten, not all the time. There's a difference between this and what's going to come after it. I'm trying to make that distinction. The missionaries were sometimes harsh. I don't want to take that away. But the Native Americans at this point, at the mission system, where it's just Spanish missionaries, the Native Americans can walk away. All right, they could still go away from there if they wanted to. Often they didn't want to because their lives really were better. The missionaries taught them better ways to grow things, better ways to make things. They were better fed, they were better educated, and so they stayed often because of that. However, after this came something different, and I really want you to kind of in your brain make the distinction between these two things. So after California becomes a state of Mexico, when Mexico gets its independence from Spain in 1821, like every other part of New Spain, California becomes a state of Mexico. And when the country of Mexico takes over, many of these missions are now bought up by wealthy landowners called rancheros, and they are turned into ranchos. And these people are not missionaries. They are not worried about creating new Catholic people. And they're really not that worried about creating new cultural Spaniards because that job has mostly been worked on for a couple hundred years now. What they're mostly interested in from the Native Americans is their labor. And they are wanting to treat them almost like slaves. It's not as bad as slavery across the Deep South. Please don't make that. It's not equal to that. But they are sometimes paid for their work on these ranchos, but they're not paid very well. And oftentimes they are beaten, and oftentimes they are not allowed to leave. They're prevented from leaving the place. I don't know that they're chained up, but they're probably guarded by men with guns and not allowed to leave. So the whole concept of it changed when Mexico took over. It's not the priest's fault, all right? It's not the original missionaries' fault. I want you to make that distinction between what happened first and then what happened later. Because I guess I'm a little bit touchy about it because I was taught it wrong. And I don't want my students to learn it wrong. So I just want you to make that distinction. All right, so let's talk about California because California is going to become a big, important state pretty soon. All right, so news spreads back east about the benefits of living in Oregon and California because let's face it, if you can get to Oregon, all you got to do is just turn a little bit south and you're in California. And there's a lot of benefits. There's good ports there. You can trade with Asia easily. There's great farmland there. And so all of this news gets spread back east, and pretty soon people start coming west by the tens of thousands. And so it opens up a whole new area for settlement and colonization. But what it also does is it floods the area with United States people into an area, especially California and the area that's New Mexico too, although we're talking California now, but it floods the area with United States people so that eventually, like Texas, where the Anglos outnumbered the Tejanos 6-1, eventually in California, you're going to have almost something similar where you have the people from the United States outnumbering the Californios quite significantly too. And so that's going to play into a new scenario as well. I'm going to stop here and break this into two parts just because it gets kind of long.